I'm recording this on Monday, so by Friday NaNoWriMo will have finished and hopefully I'll get to 50k words, but at the moment I'm at 40k and this is how I'm doing it inside of Obsidian, not the traditional Microsoft Word, Google Docs or Scrivener apps. This is where I'm at right now and I'll do a screen recording which I'll put over right as I'm speaking now so you can see where I got to by the 30th. So for those new to Obsidian, what it is a folder that you open up on your computer inside of an Obsidian app. So you can see here, this is the Files core plugin inside of Obsidian, but what it's done is it's opened up a folder on my computer that says NaNoWriMo, and inside of that folder are 3 other folders, one of them called Book, Class, and then Templates. And you can see as I hover over, I've got 7 files in the templates. I can click it, and that's inside of it. I've then got files in the class, and then I've got folders inside of this folder, and this is where all of the information about the book is put. Next to the Files core plugin, I have the Search core plugin, which lets me search any text, file, folder, or piece of information inside of this vault folder being the NaNoWriMo folder, and inside of this search I can search for anything inside of the book or any other books that I add in here. So unlike in Scrivener projects, you can have multiple projects in Obsidian. You could have them in separate vaults. I prefer to keep them in one so all of the information is kept in one place for the series. Looking down the left sidebar, I then have the Bookmarks core plugin, which is like a favorites, and I have this canvas view, this canvas mind map saved as a bookmark, and that's called the book overview when it's a file. And then I have an outline file, so if I click on that, it takes me to an outline file, which has a table in it, and then some headings, which I'll go through a little bit later on. Moving over to the right sidebar, I have the outline core plugin. So if I go into outline, you can see Plot Notes is a heading, which I can navigate to by clicking in the outline, and if I want, I can drag a heading down and it will move everything underneath that heading, and it will move everything up or below, so you can reorder files using the Outline core plugin. There is then the backlinks, which are files that link back to the one that you're on. So at the moment, you can see we're in the outline file, and the outgoing links is the first chapter and the second chapter. And you can see there is the page preview. That's currently my second chapter, which, as you can see, this is a placeholder, so there's not much in there, and that's the first chapter. So I can see them as a page preview, but they are outgoing links, which are shown in this little option. But in the backlinks, if I was to go to the first chapter, you can see in the backlinks, it's been linked in outline. And they also show down the bottom of the file. I'm going to go back to the outline, then I'm going to collapse the right sidebar, and I'm going to move back to the Files core plugin, click on Book Outline, and quickly go through the ribbon. So this is the quick switcher, which I use my hotkeys for on my keyboard. So Control-O is the one I've picked, and I can select any file. So I can go to the first chapter, or the second chapter, or maybe a character. So I've put myself as a character. You can see it's in the book folder, characters folder, and called Danny Hatcher, so I can quickly switch between any file I want. There is then a button to create a canvas just like this, which I'll go through in a second. Insert template, which I don't use because I've used something else. And then command palette, which is loads of other options Obsidian gives you. Now the reason I don't use the insert template is because I created something custom for myself. So if I push Control N on my keyboard, I can now add an object, theory, which is magic related, location or setting, which is setting related, skill, which is also magic related, and then character. And you can change these in any way you want. So if I want to add a character, I would push Control N, type C on my keyboard, enter for character, add their new name, so new name, and when I push enter, what that's going to do is create a new character. You can see it's now in the character section, so if I zoom in, it's the new name character. They've got a person icon and they haven't been mapped, and there's currently no species information in there either. And if we go over to the folders, what it's done is it's automatically created a file inside of the folder. So you can see it's in the characters folder, inside the book folder, and there's the new name character. So if I control click on my mouse, I create a new tab, and here is that character. By left clicking on the tab, dragging it to the right until there's a color, and then letting go, I've now created a split screen. So you can see we've got the overview canvas, which is still showing everything that's going on, plus the new tab, which has the new character. If I was to then change this, let's say Carol, and then come out, that file has now been renamed. So now it's the Carol file, and that's now being shown inside of this canvas data view query to say, hey, Carol is now the other character. Looking inside the file, you can see there is properties. You can close them or open them. You can completely hide them if you want. And then I have a class. This is a character class. And what this does is it gives me options of specific pieces of information for characters. So if I click on the person icon, you can see we've got the class option. So I can change this to a chapter, magic, or setting. And you can add more or take away some if you want, but every file that is a character class gets a species option, which is a drop down of human, alien, or robot. They're just the ones that I came up with, and then a mapped, what's called a boolean, so a tick box, whether it's true or false. And you can see you can tick that on, tick that off. You could do it this way as well, and then with the species I can click the drop down and it gives me the three. So let's say Carol is an alien, and what that's going to do is inside of the canvas show that Carol is an alien. But I don't have to go to the file, I can do it from the canvas. So I can click on John's man, then go into species and say John is a human. And now inside of John's file, so if I control click, create a new tab, you can see John is a character, human, and he has been mapped. Now mapped is something that I personally use. If I close down these tabs, you can see at the top we have a title that says character map. So when I click on this, I go to another canvas, and this one shows me all of the characters and helps me map out what's going on. In this quick example, I've got light, so the light characters, the good characters, dark, so the bad or the evil characters. And if I double click, you can see I can then change any text. For those unfamiliar with Obsidian, this CSS is changing the way that this looks. So inside of default Obsidian, it won't look the same, which would look odd like this. So I wouldn't do it exactly like this, but because I'm using the Candy canvas, which I mentioned in a previous video that I'll link in the top right, it allows much more aesthetic looks inside of the canvas. So I wanted to show you the options that I personally use, but if you don't want to buy the Candy canvas, then you'd use something that looks a little bit more like the default canvas here. So if we go back to the character map, in addition to the list from the dark and light, I also have a location and then people or characters in that location. So I can see at home there is me, and then in the mountain, which is a location, it's somewhere else. Now again, because it's the canvas, I get the page preview. There is nothing in the home file. If I control click, go to home, type a house because it's a house. Now when I hover over, you can see there's a house in the information. So any information I have about the building, the location, or the people inside of the file, I can see in the canvas. Moving down underneath, I've done something similar, but this is using labels. So I can see this is John. So if I do need to see information about the person, I can quickly with a hover see what's going on with that person. But then I have information about the relationship. So in this relationship, they are friends, but they have a disagreement at some point, with information about the person that's needed for this relationship to happen inside of the cards that's being shown. As I zoom out, you can see this goes quite big, so my canvas is actually very large with lots of different interactions with different characters, families, and everything else is going on. But this is just a very quick example of what you could do with a character map. And if I double click inside of this file, you can see this looks like a little bit of a code block because it's a query. It's essentially a search, and in here I'm listing all of the files from the book character folder, and then where the property mapped is not true. So if I click on Carol, you can see map is not true because it's not ticked. If I tick this, then go back, you can see that person's no longer in the list, but they weren't mapped, so I tick that off. And to me, mapped means I've put them either in a relationship, so I know what's going on as I'm writing the story, or I've mapped them into whether they're the good, the bad, or they're in some faction, or some group, or some idea, or whatever way I'm categorizing the characters or the creatures inside of the story. Going back to the overview, that's a character map. I also have a magic map, a location map, so I can see the different pieces of settings. So you can see this setting is the 1970s, and any information about the time period or the clothes may go into setting information, locations, etc. And I will have a map for each so I can see what's going on, and it reminds me all the different relationships and pieces of information I need as I'm telling the story, rather than in a big long list of words on a page, because I don't want to be reading through lots. It's far easier for me to see it all in a canvas like this. If I go over to the storyboard, you can see this is actually a file. So when I hover, this is a file. If I hover over this card, there is nothing at the top. And that's because the canvas has 3 different types of cards: a blank card, a file card, which is any file, so let's put the Carol character in there, and then a media card. I don't have any images, but you can put images or videos or anything like that inside of the canvas, which may be helpful for a location map or inside of your character map. If I come into here and then add some information and then come out, you can see I've edited the Carol file. So when I go into characters, then I bring up the character file, you can see there's the information. So I can drag that over. If I add a new line, you can see they're exactly the same because the canvas is just showing what the file information has. So I can then delete that line and now it's gone. But I don't want either of these, so I'm going to click, drag, push delete on my keyboard, get rid of those, and then center everything. So you can see the storyboard is a file, and that's the outline file inside of the book folder. So I could click here to go there, or I can double click there, and now I'm inside of the storyboard. I'm just going to zoom in, make all the font a bit bigger so it's easier to see. And as you can see, I'm storyboarding in a table. I have a link to the chapter file. So again, I can read stuff what's going on, but I can also add information. So inside of the file, there are properties, but you can see this is a chapter, not a character. So inside the chapter, I had different property information. There is the word count that I manually put in, I manually update because I personally feel it's better when I manually go, yes, I've done 1,500 words in this chapter or whatever word count it is. I have a stage, which is a drop down. It goes from draft, rewrite, edit. I personally add a couple more, but again, you can add or change as much as you want with that. A position number, which I'll expand on a little later. And then also inside of the chapters, I have characters, locations, and magic information. So as I'm storyboarding where all the plot points are, so plot point 1 is in chapter 1, 2 is in chapter 2, plot point 3 of the main plot is actually in whatever chapter this is, 5 or 6, wherever that may be. Subplots again being mapped out, and I wouldn't actually have point 1, 2, 3, I would have exactly what it is, so maybe the antagonist does something or the protagonist does something, and you can make this table as big or as small as you want. So I have these very small, so subplot, subplot, you get the point. And then you can make the rows go down as far as you want. So it's a table very similar to those that are familiar, J.K. Rowling's handwritten table. You could do it in Excel, but I'm doing it inside of Obsidian because, like I say, I can link to anything. So if there is a character, say Carol is related to subplot inside of chapter 2, I can put Carol in there and say, oh wait, I need that information. I can do it inside of the storyboarding rather than having to go to the character file or navigate to wherever I can do it here basically. So I right click and there we go. So if, for example, Carol is friends with Danny, I can say friend Danny. So again, I've linked it using the 2 brackets inside of Obsidian to link the files. Now if the subplot relates to Carol's friend and I can't remember what Carol's friend is, I can hover over, oh, that's the friend, what's the friend information? I can also see that as well. So all the information that I would need to see when I'm storyboarding anything can be viewed whilst I'm editing the storyboard table, which obviously if I'm doing the storyboarding in another tool such as Excel or on paper, I can't see that information. I would need all of the pages in front of me, which in Obsidian, I don't need the pages in front of me. I can just hover over and see it and then carry on writing. I don't actually need all these rows, so I'm going to delete all of them and delete them, and I will delete this one as well. There will be a template download in the description. For additional plot notes or ideas, I can then draft them inside of this outline file or put them literally anywhere I want. But typically I find the plot points coming to me while I'm writing. So I can go to the Longform tab, click on first, it takes me to the first chapter. So this is the first line I have in the first chapter. These are the properties which when I'm writing, I hide because I don't want to see them. And this is down the bottom of the file, but I'm never actually looking at that because I'm writing in here. For those curious, this highlighted line just follows the cursor so I know where I am. So if I have blocks of text, I can see exactly where the cursor is, which makes finding where I am far easier. That's a custom piece of CSS which will come with a template, and there is loads of customization you can add to Obsidian. And going into the settings bottom left, appearance, you can then change the theme to make it light, dark, change the color. There's loads of other custom themes as well that people have made that you could use. I personally use the default theme and then add the additions CSS here. This Canvas Candy won't be available in the download because this is a paid product that's been created by TFT Hacker, but this additions, if I click on the folder and open up the file, you can see this is all the code that I have added to this, which basically says highlight the active line in the light mode, highlight the active line in the dark mode, and this gives you some options to change the hover. So I make the hover bigger than than default, and then I make the table column minimum by default. So if I go to a new tab, Control O, outline, when I create a new column, it's 0 by default rather than it being a bigger size. And when I click over the hover, you can see it's going 700 pixels wide. By default, it's a little bit smaller, but I don't like meshing all the words together, so I personally prefer a bigger preview. But getting back to those quick points, when I'm writing, once I've got to a point where I need to stop, what I'll do is I'll add a bullet point, so dash space, you can add a hotkey to that or do whatever you want. I will then add whatever points I want to write in next inside of this chapter below as a bullet point, so I know when I get all the way to the end of the script, okay, these are the points I want to write about next. And if I've got a point that I want to write about that I know has been mentioned somewhere, I can add a tab, go to book overview, and I can see, oh, where was this point mentioned? Oh, that point was mentioned in this chapter. So I can go to the chapter, then go to the bottom or wherever it needs to be in the text, add the bullet point, and then idea wherever it needs to be inside of the chapter. I can close that down, and then I'm back writing again. When looking inside of the sidebar in the long form, you've got scene 1 and scene 2. You can have embedded scenes, so a chapter and then a scene underneath it. I found that too granular. I don't like it. I much rather have, say, 4,000 words in one file than 4,000 words split over 3 different scenes. That's my personal preference, but it is an option. So if we add a third scene, I push enter, it's now created a new file, and it's a chapter. So if we go to project, you can see the title is draft 1. And if I bring the files plugin down here so you can see everything that's going on, everything's customizable for those unfamiliar with Obsidian. But inside of the draft 1 folder, that's the project I'm currently working on, we then have all of those chapter files, so first, second, and third as chapter files. There is also a scene template, so when we come in here and we go fourth and then enter to add a new file, it's using the scene template which I've created in the template folder. So when I click on the chapter template, it's going to add all of this information. If I want to add a header inside every scene, I add a header to the chapter template. Now, if I add a fifth, you can see there's the header because that's now been added to the template. I'm going to remove that. I'm actually going to delete that file because I don't want it. Go to chapter, delete that as well. These are all hotkeys that I'm using to speed things up. Delete that one, go back to third, and then drag that down because we don't need to see all of that. You'll also notice now we have the word count, and this is the word count for today. So it's today's word count session. If I add more words, it's going to add more words to the word count. You can see we've got 5 words in this scene, 38 in the entire project. The project being all of these 3 files because that's the project that we're working in. And if I delete all of those words, you can see the 38 is going to go to 33, and now there's no words in this scene, obviously, because we just deleted them. Going into the settings, going into long form and scrolling down, you can then change that session word count to as many as you want. Obviously for NaNoWriMo, it's 1,700. For the last couple of days, it's been like 2,500 for me because I have other writing obligations that I want to do, so NaNoWriMo has had stops and starts. You can show word count or hide it. There is lots of customization here. I personally turn on count deletion against goal so that when I do delete words, it comes off of the goal, but you can keep them on, but I don't know why you would do that, just my personal preference. And then you can see we're in draft 1, but you can make another draft. So I click on plus. I'm going to say draft 2, and then we copy scenes. I personally copy scenes, but you can just make a brand new draft that's completely empty. So I push create. Now at the top, we've got draft 1, we're in draft 2, we're in the index file, and what that's done, if we have a look at the files, so the files and folders on our computer, we've got a folder called draft 1. But we've just created a folder called draft 2 with the same chapter scenes inside of it because it's copied them. If I right click and delete that folder, you can see the Longform plugin has seen that we've just deleted it. So it's a quick way, pushing this button is a quick way to recreate or duplicate the project, the book project, so you can then go in and do the second round edits or reviews or whatever it is that you're doing. Maybe you want to do your edits inside of Word that has better formatting than Obsidian, so you can use this plugin to compile everything. And what it will do is get rid of those properties because obviously they're useless outside of Obsidian, remove all of the links, so if you've linked files or chapters and pages, then it will remove those. It will then prepend the title, so it will add a title to each scene, concatenate text, save the note, and then if we push the compile button, it will do all of those things. You can see there's the first chapter, there's the second chapter, third chapter that apparently I spelt wrong. I can't believe I just noticed that. And that's all inside of the manuscript file, which again, if we have a look at our folders going into draft, there's the manuscript, which if I click on the command palette button in the ribbon or push Ctrl P as the hotkey, type Word, you can see you can export as Word document, so I'm going to push that button, and now I've successfully exported this as a Word document, which you can see is showing inside of the draft one folder. So when I click on docx, I now have my manuscript. Going back to these properties quickly, when I'm writing, I want to know what characters are in what chapter. So when I push on this button, it gives me a list of all the characters. So you can see, let's put Gizmo in there and then tick. It's now linked Gizmo as the character to this chapter. And I can see when I go into the Gizmo character file, it's in the first chapter and the second chapter because they're linked as characters. And I've done the same for locations. So when I push this button, it gives me the 2 locations that I currently have. And magic, if I click on this, I can see what magic's going on, whether it's theory, skill, or whatever's happening. And I can filter those links as well. But this gives me a very nice summary right at the top of the chapter, what's going on. So I know what magic's been referenced, what characters I'm mainly talking about, and then the locations. For those more familiar with Obsidian, you can then query these in data view queries and do loads of other stuff. But simply put, it just gives me a summary of what's going on in this chapter. And as an example, if I'm halfway through writing something, I think, oh, I need a new character, Control N, character, placeholder, and then enter. I can then come up to characters, add the character, there's the placeholder at the top, click on that one. So now the placeholder character is inside of this file very quickly. I didn't need to do much more and everything else has been set. If I bracket, placeholder, I now have the placeholder character here. If I do then decide their name later on, I can right click, rename, Clive, and then save, and now you can see it's renamed Clive there and renamed Clive inside of this character because it's a file. We click, there's Clive. He's a character. Species is, let's say it's a human, and they have not been mapped because we haven't put them in the character canvas map yet. So we can go back to the first, and there's all the information done. It's very easy to keep track of all the storylines this way. And for those of you that like a visual overview, I can go to the graph, and I personally don't use this, but maybe this could be useful to some of you that are less familiar with Obsidian. You can see red is all of the characters, yellow is all of the locations, green are the chapters, and then this great one is obviously the outline. And all of those links that I've added in properties show. So I can see inside the first chapter, that's what's going on. In the second chapter, that's what's going on. And the way I've done this is I filtered for the book folder, and then inside of the groups, I then said, okay, characters be red. You can change it to whatever color you want. And then we've got settings, magic, and then draft 1 chapters. So if draft 2 happens, you can then go into draft 2, and maybe that's something else because it's a different folder. And yes, if you want to change something, you can click, takes you to the file, then go back, and it will take you back to the canvas, which you can then navigate around to see all of the links that's going on. To me, this is more of a flashy, oh, look what I can do, rather than practical use, but maybe you found a use for it. I don't know. That is a somewhat quick overview of how I've written inside of Obsidian for NaNoWriMo. If you have any questions, you can join the Discord. There's a link in the description below about setting things up, customizing things in your own way, and there's no charge on that, just to be perfectly clear. I'm more than happy to help. Discord is just easier than YouTube when it comes to comments.